Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about, do you need a teacher to learn Kriya Yoga? So the short answer to this question is yes. But then the follow-up question, can you actually learn Kriya Yoga without a teacher, is also yes. It just depends on where you get your source information. So Kriya Yoga is taught with many different lineages. There are some that are householder lineages, like the one that I'm part of, which is the Panchanan Bhattacharya lineage. And there are also monastic lineages. There's some organizations out there that have this more monastic focus. And as a result of having these lineages, Kriya Yoga tends to be secretive. People don't want to share the Kriya Yoga practices with people who won't necessarily appreciate them. And certainly acknowledging that this is something that has come, it's a form of transmission called Guru Parampara, basically means through the lineage of the gurus or the teachers. And certainly when Lahiri Baba, Lahiri Mahashai, started teaching students in Benares in the 1800s and so on, and was passing on the Kriya Yoga practices to various students, he set up this one-to-one relationship with the students, right? So it's obvious that he recognized that having a one-to-one relationship, having a sort of a student and mentor relationship is really vital to being able to understand and practice the teachings. The teacher being somebody that the student can use as a feedback mechanism for their practice. They can ask questions when they run into challenges. There were some efforts in the 1900s with a certain organization that put sort of a Kriya correspondence course together. And so sharing Kriya Yoga through printed lessons. And from my perspective, this is not ideal. The idea was within that organization that there would be local leaders if the actual teacher was not available, that local leaders, local monastics, if you will, and some non-monastic teachers would be able to inform the student once they've gone through their printed lessons to help them to fine-tune their technique and maybe provides additional explanation. From my perspective, this is not ideal at all. It's very challenging to engage in a process of learning Kriya Yoga from a book, from printed forms. Certainly there are people out there who have written about Kriya Yoga and even have shared some of the practices. And this, I think, can be a helpful resource for folks who are learning the practice so that they can see, how these different schools and so on would approach different practices. But from my perspective, it's really important to establish a relationship between a student and a teacher. But that doesn't have to be the kind of relationship that is talked about as a guru-disciple relationship, which is very hierarchical, right? Where the student pays their obeisance to the teacher and follows the teacher without question as if the teacher is the same as God. And that's a challenge, I think, in a hierarchical model of spirituality where you have the leaders at the top and the students, at the bottom, and then you have various levels of hierarchy sort of creating this spiritual pyramid. The challenge is because then it's all about following. And when you are learning something like Kriya Yoga, it is intended for one's liberation. It is intended for one to have a one-to-one relationship with Source, if you will. So that is the value of Kriya Yoga, is that can lead you through an internal process where you develop your one-to-one relationship with what one might call the divine, right? I prefer the terminology as Source because it strips away the religious connotation. And so this is a natural relationship. It isn't necessarily a spiritual relationship or a metaphysical relationship. It is a natural relationship. We all have this aspect of ourselves, which is more than our bodies, our minds, our thoughts, etc. You could think of it as divine. I think of it as nature, right? So getting internally connected to one's true nature. And as a result of that, everybody has a one-to-one connection with Source, with their true nature. They don't need an intermediary to play a role in facilitating that connection. That connection is there. It's more about how you rediscover it. And part of the reason for this is because as humans, we have, gone through many different eras in our history. And as a result, society has created dynamics that don't necessarily value people's individual connection with source, their connection with their true nature. And as a result of that, many spiritual practices and teachings have been suppressed over various eras, right? And people have been persecuted. And certainly if you were to roll back a few hundred years and you had someone like myself talking about, these type of practices, likely I would be persecuted. And so we are very fortunate that we live in this day and age where many practices can be shared, and especially when communications are so efficient for us to be able to share instant communications across the globe between student and teacher, right? So it is really, we're in an ideal place right now to be able to learn and to celebrate value and internalize these different, priceless, spiritual teachings, basically, right? So, but they also come with a cultural component to them, which can often take us away from our direct connection with source. And that's really, when I talk about the teacher, a teacher is really good because it's somebody who has had the experience of using a particular practice like Kriya Yoga to rediscover their individual one-to-one relationship with source, right? And different teachers embody that in various levels of success, right? Some are more connected than others, for sure. And I have met some really amazing teachers where you're like, wow, this is amazing. Their source connection is amazing. But really what a teacher does is they can give you some practices, things that they have learned through their experience, developed a stronger connection, and they can share those. And really that's what Kriya Yoga is about, right? Is sharing those practices. But it's really up to the student to apply them and to develop again or to reestablish their strong connection with source. That's really the role of the teacher, is to help inform and be a model for the student to do that. But the teacher doesn't do it for the student does it for themselves through establishing that relationship. And that's really what, when I talk about learning Kriya Yoga yourself, you don't need the teacher to learn it. You need the teacher to present it to you, to say, hey, you have the option to learn these. Here are the practices. Go at it. And then the student must do the work. So the challenge, as I said, with printed lessons, printed teachings, is that you don't have that feedback mechanism with the teacher. But ultimately, it's really up to the student to rediscover, to apply the teachings, to reestablish their relationship with source. So really, at the end of the day, what you want is a teacher who really cares about your development, that they're not interested in you being a part of a hierarchy, being part of a order, if you will, a hierarchical order where one gains favor of the leader over time and eventually moves up in the pecking order. That distracts from your connection with source. You don't want any of that, which probably makes sense why sannyasis in India basically said, I don't want any part of the caste system. I don't want to fit in the hierarchy. I want to just go and wander and establish my connection with the divine, right? Which makes sense. And in China, there are a whole set of Taoist practitioners who practice Taoist internal alchemy that did very much the same thing. We call them wandering Taoists. And basically they said, okay, there was a effort, during Genghis Khan's reign and afterwards of creating this sort of monastic version of Taoism. It really created a whole social stratification and hierarchy that had nothing to do with one's connection to source. So hence the wandering Taoists said, okay, I'm not interested in that. I'm going to go off into the wilderness and cultivate my personal one-to-one relationship with source, my natural connection, right? Which is why in Taoism, Tao means the way. It's the way of nature. So one develops one's ability to connect with nature and follows the way of nature. That's not following the ways of social hierarchy. It is going beyond that. In Kriya Yoga, the same kind of thing, right? going beyond that, not being involved in some kind of religious organization, which is why Lahiri Baba during his life was like, okay, don't start any kind of, religious organizations about Kriya Yoga in my name, because I don't believe in that. So really learning Kriya Yoga is about you learning from somebody who knows, what they're talking about, for one thing, with Kriya. You learning some of the practices and applying them. And then you develop your connection with Source, your true nature. And that will empower your development. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.